now, I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ellen Gilinsky. Dr. Gilinsky is a senior policy advisor to the acting assistant administrator for water in the Office of Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to this, she spent 7 years as director of the Water Division at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And she also served for 5 years at DEQ as the manager of the Office of Wetlands and Water Protection, where she helped to craft Virginia's non-tidal wetlands program. Dr. Gilinsky also worked as an environmental consultant at several regional and national environmental engineering firms, also where she focused on water issues. And she received her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Pennsylvania and her doctorate in zoology with a concentration in aquatic ecology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has also been a past president of the Association of Clean Water Administrators. She held a gubernatorial appointment to the State Advisory Board of the Virginia Water Resources Research Center, and she was an adjunct faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Departments of Biology and Environmental Studies. And now I welcome Dr. Gilinsky to tell us the story of our nation's waters.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today, and I always enjoy being at a marine institute. It just has such a great feel to it with a lot of research going on and the connection between environment and people, and just having so many people come out today just bears witness to that. So thank you so much for having me. I understand, for those of you who are in this class, I looked at your curriculum. It looks very exciting, a lot of outdoor activities, so I hope the weather improves for you. But you're going to actually be doing some of the sampling and experiencing some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in terms of when you go out and try to sample water quality and biology to look at how our waters are doing. So I also commend you for taking the time out of your careers to do this science immersion class, because I think it's so important for our journalists to really understand what goes behind the science, because you're the ones who are reporting this to the public and really influencing public opinion and politics and everything else in the way you report on these important environmental issues. So really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your busy schedules to do this. So it all starts with the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act was passed in October of 1972. It's had several amendments since then, but the basic tenets have not changed. The purpose of the Clean Water Act is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters. And it's turned out to be quite a daunting task. We're certainly not there yet, but we continue to try to improve and protect our waters. But as you can see, with the extent of the 42 million acres of lakes, thousands of miles of coast, et cetera, there's a lot to do. So I like to explain the Clean Water Act by using this water wheel. So basically, what you start to do under the Clean Water Act to protect and restore waters, first you have to determine what you have. So you set standards for your water as to what that water, what levels of chemicals and biology need to be in that water to support a healthy community. And each state does that. So it's not done on a national level. The idea of the Clean Water Act is to push it down to the state and local level, with the Environmental Protection Agency providing a basic framework for what is done. So you basically determine for a given body of water what is the best quality of that water. Then you assess that water against that quality. If you find out that the water is not as good as it should be, you call it, it's impaired, then you develop a watershed restoration plan. You issue permits. In permits you have levels designed to protect the water quality, so you don't let a sewage treatment plant, it can only discharge X amount of nitrogen to protect the water body from having too much nitrogen. And then you monitor again, see how everything's doing, and you measure your progress. So that's it's sort of an endless cycle, but eventually you can get, the idea is that you get waters to where they're no longer impaired, they're healthy, and then you try to keep them healthy. So as I said, this, it gets pushed down to the local level as much as possible. So states and tribes and our territories have the primary role in setting the standards for their waters, identifying the high quality waters that are already in good shape to protect, and identifying the ones that are impaired that we need to improve. And in the Clean Water Act, there is a requirement that you report on the condition of all waters, and that's called a 305B water quality assessment. So states produce those every 2 years, supposedly. They sometimes take a little bit longer because they're really complicated to produce. I can tell you that from when I was managing the programs in Virginia. And a lot of people do monitoring and reporting. The states do it, local governments do it, USGS, the Geological Survey, NOAA does it, and also universities do a lot of monitoring. And I wanted to point out that the University of Rhode Island is the home of one of the oldest volunteer monitoring organizations in the country, the URI Watershed Watch. And so, you know, I think that's certainly something to be proud of, and we really count on universities to provide high quality data. So if all these states are doing all this great monitoring all over the country, why do we need a national monitoring network? Well, you can't really add up each individual state report and make it into a national report because the state reports have a different purpose to them. Basically, the state reports, as I said, they you know, have waters and they're assessing their waters against water quality standards. So they're not really judging it, the waters against what the best that water can be, or they're measuring it for a specific purpose. It's called targeted monitoring. And as you can imagine, if you have monitoring that's targeted for specific purposes, like to see if permits are working for wastewater discharges, for example, that's not giving you a full picture of what the waters in the United States are. In fact, it's probably skewed more toward waters that are not doing so well because you're doing most of your monitoring where you have most of your dischargers. And then you do less monitoring in your pristine waters. So you can't really add up this targeted monitoring. So what we found was that we couldn't answer questions, for instance, that Congress was asking about, you know, how's water looking in the United States? Well, you know, in New Jersey it's this, in Rhode Island it's this, but you couldn't really add it up. And we weren't the only ones noticing this. Of course, journalists were noticing this too. So this is from USA Today in 2002. But basically, it was an article saying, you know, why can't we say something about the quality of our nation's waters, oceans? What are we getting for the billions of dollars we're spending on cleaning up the environment? Is our water cleaner? And as I said, the journalists weren't the only ones asking these questions. Congress was asking it. The Government Accounting Office did a report asking these questions. So questions, as I said, like what's the condition of all the nation's waters? Are we meeting Clean Water Act goals? Is water quality improving over time? Are we keeping our good waters clean? What stressors are the most widespread across the United States? What's causing impact to waters? And how are our Clean Water Act programs doing, and are we seeing results from the money we're spending? So, you know, we got asked these questions and we're like, well, you know, we really don't have that national picture. So enter the National Aquatic Resource Surveys, and it's sort of probably to some of you, it doesn't, you know, it seems like a no-brainer. Well, how come we weren't doing this, you know, before, all over the country? Well, it's pretty difficult to get everyone together, everybody doing the same thing at the same time to present a national picture. And really, up until the 5 years ago or so when we started doing these, a lot of the federal dollars were going to the states to do their state monitoring, which is also very important. So this doesn't take the place of that state monitoring, it's an addition to it. So these surveys were done along with states and tribes. The states and tribes provided some of the field work. They supplemented with their own data and things like that. We evaluated all surface waters within the 48 contiguous states, and the goal is to track status and trends. And before we set out to start these surveys, there was a lot of research and pilots that were done, some of them right at the lab next door here at the EPA Narragansett lab and our other ORD facilities to look at, what kinds of things you have to sample, what methods should you use, what are those most scientifically defensible methods. So the idea is to have a nationally consistent approach. So the first thing that's really important is to have a statistically representative design, because obviously you're not going to sample every single lake, stream, and wetland in the United States, but you want to be representative of that. So what we did was a probabilistic design where you had, the miles of streams that are in the United States or in a region. We actually did it by region. And then you figure out with probabilities, like how many you have to sample and where, and then you randomly pick streams. So you're not targeting certain kinds of streams. So that took a lot of time to do that design. Then you have to pick the same indicators that relate to Clean Water Act goals. Everybody needs to use the same field and lab protocols. There has to be really rigorous quality assurance and data management, as you can imagine. And again, the data needs to be interpreted in a consistent manner. Because again, when each state does it, they're not always using the same methods. While they're using good methods and valid methods, they're not always the same.
What's the time frame that this approach started?
Well, that's next slide, or 2 slides. I have that on here. I have a table that shows all that. But basically, I think 5 years ago it started. We started to do things, although coastal surveys have been done for longer than that. So again, so this National Aquatic Resource Survey also helps the states, because the states have information on the status of waters on a broader scale. I know when I was in Virginia, I would get asked, well, we know what the waters in Virginia are like, but how's that stack up with the other states? How's that stack up with the national picture? Are our waters dirtier? Are they cleaner? So this way states can compare with that. And also the states, as I said, supplemented this with some of their own sampling as well, so they could use it. They did it at the same time, so they could use it together with theirs. So that was very important. Okay, and how do these aquatic resource surveys tell the story? Detailed reports and summaries are available online. The data is all available. It's publicly available. These stories do receive press attention when we publish one of these reports. We do get a lot of questions about it. And we also use these reports to help inform agency priorities for the coming years. And so this is the schedule that I want when you asked how long it takes. So basically, we're looking at rivers and streams, coastal areas, wetlands, and lakes. So basically, it's a 5-year window, starting with the design. You design your sampling and train everybody. Then you go out in the field and do it. Then you have another year where you do your lab and data analysis. Then you have the report. Then you start research for the next year. So you're always busy doing something. And as you can see on this, some things take a little longer than you thought. Like for coastal, the lab and data analysis took 2 years instead of 1 year. So it's a rotating 5-year basis of when you can do these surveys. And as I said earlier, the science is incredibly important, the science behind these surveys. And that's one thing that we really tried to emphasize at EPA as well as at other federal agencies. President Obama issued a memo in 2009 calling for government to improve and advance scientific integrity so that the public has a trust in the scientific process, and that to make sure that science information is peer reviewed. So that's a very important aspect of these reports, is the peer review part of it, starting from the design, statistical design, the field methods, everything is peer reviewed. It's not just done by EPA. Okay, so we talked, I mentioned a little bit about the design. So when you're doing one of these surveys, you're talking about upwards of 1,000 sites across the country that are randomly selected. You know, they need to represent all in space, but also they need to be representative of the amount of that resource that's in the area. And we repeat some sites, so it's not totally random the second time you do it, because you want to repeat certain sites to see the trends as well as look at new sites. And then also 10% of the sites are revisited for quality assurance. So within the next year, you go back to 10% of the sites and resample them to see you know, if you're getting similar results or if something was wrong that year that you were sampling it. And it might be either, you know, error in the sampler, or maybe there was, you know, a hurricane or something that would have influenced the data that year. So for the rivers and streams survey, just for example, the one that I'm going to talk, that was just completed, well, the report was just completed, the draft report, almost 2,000 sites were sampled over a 2-year period. There were 85 field crews spread out all over the country. They sampled waters as large as the Mississippi and as small as a mountain headwater stream. And they generated 10 million bits of data. That's pretty impressive. And it's all available. So this shows you just an idea of the, there's a lot of sampling going on. So this is all the different surveys. So the different colors represent the NRSA is the rivers and streams. There's the coastal, NCCA or the coastal. NLA is the National Lakes Assessment. But the reason I put this up here is so you see there's not as many sampling points in the West. Well, because in the arid West, there's not as much water as in the wet East. So because it's probabilistic, you're sampling more where there's more waters. So it's not an even distribution across the country. It's the probability of that particular water body being there, and then you sample representative plots. So the other thing that's interesting is, like, for instance, when they were doing the wetland survey, some of the random spots were basically inaccessible. I mean, it's like you had to cut through a jungle to get to the sampling spot that you got from your randomly picked sample. So they had certain rules about when they could, you know, throw out a site and get a new site, because you had to be able to get to it to sample it. Okay, so what are we measuring at these sites? Well, so the aquatic resource surveys look at biological and physical chemical measurements. So in terms of biological indicators, there's been a lot of years of study on you know, what are the best indicators of water quality. And benthic macroinvertebrates, you know, aquatic, especially aquatic insect larvae that live in the bottoms of lakes and streams, are very good integrators of water quality condition. So it's very well known, like certain species of benthic macroinvertebrates are pollution tolerant, certain species are very sensitive. We've developed indices of this, so that's a good tool to use. We also looked at plants like diatoms, algae, you know, microscopic plant organisms that float in the water column or on the rocks and bottoms of streams and lakes. Those are also good indicators. And fish also can be indicators of water quality, although as you can imagine, fish move around a lot, so they can't tell you as much as maybe a stationary organism or that is, you know, is right in one place. We also looked at the extent of key stressors, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, which are nutrients which you might think are good for you, but in too many amounts they're bad. They cause algae blooms in the water that choke out life in the water. They decompose and use all the oxygen, and then everything else dies in the water. Also, sediment is a stressor. If too much sediment gets in a stream or river, you choke out the bottom organisms, and again, detracting from the water quality, and also physical habitat. You know, what kind, has the stream been artificially channelized? You know, have you paved right up to the stream, or do you have a farm field right up to the stream without any kind of buffer, no tree cover? Those are all stresses on the stream. So, we're also looking at things like contaminants of emerging concern, like pharmaceutical products and such, but we were just sampling those. We don't really have indicators worked out for that, or even we don't even know what levels should be acceptable in the water body. So that brings us to, what are you measuring against? So when I talked about how the states do their water quality sampling, they set a standard for the amount of oxygen that's healthy in that stream. Well, we're not setting standards, and we're not going to assess against each state's standards because they're different. So what we have to figure out is, what is our expectation of what is a healthy water? So what we did was we looked at our reference condition was the least disturbed condition you could expect in a geographic area. So it's not what is totally undisturbed, it's what's least disturbed in your area. So we broke up the country into ecological regions, and within those regions we looked at what are the least disturbed lakes, streams, rivers, etc. And then we sampled those, and then you get a reference condition, and then in order to figure out what is good, fair, and poor, we looked at the worst 5% of those reference streams. We said that was a poor condition, that was the cutoff of poor, and the best 25% was the cutoff for good. So when you compare your streams, when we had all our streams, we said the top 25% that compared favorably to the reference condition were in good shape. So you're using that as a comparative purpose, but not sort of as an absolute, because we don't know what is the best that you can have. We just know what's the best that's out there. So let me, you heard enough about the background on how we did all this. I'm sure you want to know what the results are. So I'm going to talk about a summary of the National Rivers and Streams Assessment, and then talk a little bit about some of the other assessments, coastal condition and lakes. So the key findings from the National Aquatic Resource Survey, and by the way, so this, it says draft. So this report was put out in draft a few months ago, I think it was March, and went through a comment period that closed last month, I believe. So we got a lot of comments from scientists, from states, from stakeholders, asking questions about the report. We did have fact-checking of the data, and we did find that some of the data that was in the bigger report needs to be refined a little bit more. So that's the whole purpose of putting out a draft report, is to make sure that you have it right. So now we're sifting through all the comments, and we will be producing a final report before the end of this year, probably in November, because it takes a long time to go through this. So the percentages I'm telling you now, they might be different in the final report. They're not going to be very different, but they could be, instead of 55%, it could be 52% or something like that. So again, that's the whole purpose for something this big. We want to make sure we have everybody look at it and consider everyone's comments. And also, a lot of people said we didn't explain the reference approach well and things like that. Okay, so what we found was about 55% of streams have poor biological communities. That's a lot. That means that our rivers and streams are over about half of them are stressed. The most widespread stressors were excess levels of nutrients, and you'll see that varies according to where you are in the country. And lakes, we're doing a little better on lakes. 22% of our lakes have poor biological communities, and I think we've spent a lot of time on lakes and improving lake management because a lot of people recreate on lakes. Lakes are used a lot for water supply, so lakes have been studied for a long time. I think we've realized that you got to protect your lake shore and not apply fertilizers right next to the lake and things like that. So 22% of the lakes have poor biological communities, and our coastal waters, 6% of coastal waters are poor and 36% are fair, but we are showing an improving trend because we've been doing coastal water sampling for quite some time. So here is an idea of biological condition by climatic regions. So by the eastern highlands, the plains and lowlands, and the arid west. But at the top is the summary slide, which shows that 55% are in poor biological condition. And this biological condition was measured by the macroinvertebrates that I was telling you about, the benthic macroinvertebrate indices. And what we did was you combine, it's not just the number of critters that you find, it's their diversity, how many different kinds of species you find, what their abundance is, how tolerant they are of pollution, and it's all combined into what's called a multi-metric index for benthic macroinvertebrates. And so that's what you're looking at here, those results. And you also see that the results vary by climatic region. And if you break that down even further, these are the various ecoregion results across the country. And in general, the eastern and Midwest ecoregions have the most waters in poor biological condition. And obviously you need to drill down to look at the causes of that, but where you have more people and more activity, you generally have more pollution and more effects on your streams and rivers. So you're seeing, like in the upper Midwest and temperate plains and southern plains, you're seeing the result of a lot of agriculture, and in the east you see maybe the result of point sources of discharge, your industries and sewage treatment plants and such. But you really can't tell that just by looking at this, but it's suggestive, and then you go and look in more depth as to what the causes are. But there's definitely a variation across the United States as to the good, fair, and poor in our streams and rivers. Now, when we look at the major stressors of what's causing the poor streams, 40% of our nation's rivers and streams have excess levels of phosphorus, 27% have high levels of nitrogen. Phosphorus can come from wastewater, although now a lot of wastewater treatment plants are controlling for phosphorus. They remove the phosphorus, and it comes from agriculture because you have fertilizer has a lot of phosphorus in it, and the nitrogen is taken up by the plants, but a lot of the phosphorus binds to the sediment, and then the sediment, the soils wash into the river when you have a lot of rain like we've been having these past few weeks. They've been having a lot of rain in the Midwest. I read something about how last year drought was a problem for the crops, and this year it's too much rain, and it's washing the sediment, fertilizer, and the seedlings into the river. So we do see nutrient issues, and again, they vary across the country. We're also seeing that habitat, poor vegetation cover along our rivers and streams causes 24% of rivers and streams have poor vegetative cover, and high levels of human disturbance occur at 20% of the nation's and river stream miles, and that affects how healthy a stream is. And again, these are not final numbers. These will probably change a little bit as we go through our quality assurance. So what about changes in streams? Okay, so the neat thing here is this was only the first time that we sampled the big rivers, but it's the second time we've done weightable streams. We did that 5 years ago. So we can look at trends from then till now in the weightable streams. And what we found is that 7% fewer stream miles are in good biological condition. So that's not great news. We're finding that streams are getting worse. And 19% fewer stream miles are in good condition for phosphorus. Nitrogen actually improved a little bit, but 9% more stream miles are in good condition for nitrogen. But the phosphorus problem seems to be getting a little worse. We did find that fish habitat was improving. And I think there's been a lot of effort to do stream restoration and fish restoration all across the country. And we're seeing less disturbance in streams. So there's some good trends, but the nutrient trend is not a good one. So, we can use those results to inform what we're doing with management actions, where we're sampling more, where we're going to look in more detail into these issues. So I want to talk a bit about our coastal report since we're on the coast. So we've done a bunch of coastal reports, and they've been done with partners, with NOAA especially. And so they started in 2001. But each year, they're not exactly comparable because each year some of the methods have changed, but we've also added more areas to it. So again, you can't exactly compare them. However, the last one in 2012 was done according to this National Aquatic Resource Survey. So here are some indicators of coastal condition. They're a little bit different than for our rivers and streams, as you can imagine. So water clarity, how clear the water is, that's really important because that's how much productivity you're going to get in your coastal waters. You're going to get submerged aquatic grasses, but if the water's cloudy, they can't grow. Dissolved oxygen is really important for oysters and clams that grow on the bottom. And if there's not enough oxygen, they're going to be choked out. We also look at chlorophyll A. The chlorophyll, of course, is produced by algae and phytoplankton in the water column. So that's an indication of how productive your coastal waters are. We looked at sediment, benthics, fish tissue, and a coastal habitat index. And hopefully you're going to be going out tomorrow and sampling the fish population. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we do when you look at the fish. You're going to be doing a fish trawl if the water holds out, the weather holds out, excuse me. So what did we find? This is really a busy slide, and I've got a handout for those of you in the class so you can study it more. But the overall condition of our nation's coastal waters is fair, and the three indices showing the poorest condition are coastal habitat, sediment, and benthic condition. And when Sunshine was talking earlier about the connection between our inland and our coastal, that sediment is coming down our rivers and streams, down our estuaries and into the ocean, and also all the development along our coasts contributes sediment to the ocean, which is not a good thing. However, we are seeing a slight improvement in our coastal condition. And one thing I want to point out, so EPA is a partner in the National Estuary Program, along with others, and our National Estuary Program is fantastic. We have 28 estuaries in the National Estuary Program, and they're able to leverage federal dollars, state dollars, private dollars to get community involvement and really look at how to protect specific estuaries starting at the local level. And we have really seen improvements in our coastal condition based on the actions of the National Estuary Program. So We love that program because it probably gets some of the least funding of a lot of federal dollars, but they really maximize what they're doing. So really an important program to support. So let me just talk briefly about lakes. So in 2007, we began field work for the first National Lakes Assessment. The report was published in 2010, and in 2012, we were back in the field again for the second report, and we're looking at the data now for the second report, so we'll be able to look at trends. But as I said earlier, the 56% of our lakes are in good condition, so that is somewhat good news. But what are the major stressors of lakes? So the major stressors of lakes are lakeshore habitat. So what happens, and this makes a lot of sense, but it's surveys like this that help us hone in on those results. Because if you don't have a healthy lakeshore, you get sediment washing into your lake, you get fertilizer washing into your lakes, and they're not protected. Whereas if you have a healthy lakeshore environment with buffers, and people aren't mowing their grass right down to the edge of the lake, your lake is in much more of a natural state. And we also found, that was more important even than nitrogen and phosphorus was the lakeshore habitat. So again, this is the kind of information you can find out from these surveys. So applying the data, I think I've been talking about this throughout the talk. It lets us examine relationships between the various indicators of water quality. It helps states and tribes manage their water resources. It improves public understanding of, do we have a problem with water quality? What could be causing it? What can we do about it? So we really, there's a lot of different ways that aquatic resource surveys can be used. At EPA, we're using the surveys to inform several of our initiatives, and I will go through some of them. So I already really talked about nutrients. Obviously we have a nutrient problem, and we're working really closely with the states to address nutrients. We're partnering with states and other stakeholders to develop frameworks to prioritize watersheds to help reduce nutrients. I get to go all over the country working with states on these issues, and they're doing a great job. And but we have a big task in front of us. But if you're interested in nutrient pollution, we just put together a lot of information on a new web page at EPA on nutrient pollution resources. You just have to Google nutrient pollution on our website or do a search. And we're showing what the problem is and what you can do about it and what we're doing about it. So we also have things like we've got a phone app, a smartphone app called How's My Watershed, and it's GIS based, so you can, like if you're out canoeing and you want to know, gee, what's the water quality in this, where I'm putting my paddle and splashing myself with all this water, if you go on to the How's My Watershed app, it will locate the closest water body to where you are that we've sampled. It might not be the one that you're in, but it likely will be. And it pulls up reports to see, is there a report that water is impaired? What's the water quality? Is there a cleanup plan? It's pretty cool. I've used it myself many times. So that gives you an immediate idea of how your water is. And again, gets the public engaged in thinking about their water quality, and then they'll get interested in improving that water quality or protecting it if it's already good. So we're very excited about that app, How's My Waterway? And again, that'll be on this website. We also have a national lakeshore habitat publicity campaign. And again, you saw from the survey results that it was lakeshore habitat, shoreline habitat, that was the biggest stressor for lakes. So we have an education campaign where we work with lake associations. Almost every lake has some kind of property owners association because people like to live on lakes. And so we work with them to connect the link between water quality and what they're doing along their lake shore and improving that. So that's been a successful program. And we have an urban waters program that, actually this is the administration program that involves a lot of different agencies, where we're trying to reconnect people with their waterways in urban environments. And aside from water tending to be maybe more polluted in an urban environment because you get a lot of runoff from your streets, you have combined sewer overflows from old sewer systems, and I think there's, one of your lectures is on that, or I saw something about that, about sewer overflows and stuff. Anyhow, you also have people are disconnected from the river. In a lot of urban environments, you can't even get to the river. So, you know, I know like Providence had years ago a big campaign to bring back the river, and it's been very successful. Where I live in Richmond, Virginia, the James River is it's a class 4 rapid, it's right through an urban area. And again, that people didn't used to be able to swim in there because you had the sewers overflowing during rains, and so the bacterial levels were too high, and that's being fixed. So the Urban Waters Program looks to educate people, to provide programs and dollars into urban communities to not just improve water quality, but to provide access to the water. And we have a lot of urban water communities, and again, it's also looking at other issues, housing and urban development's involved in it, and it's a great program if you want to learn more about it. And then we also have our Healthy Watersheds program. So I talked about at the beginning that it's not just about waters that aren't healthy, it's about protecting our waters that are healthy. Because we don't want to get in a cycle of polluting and cleaning up. So this National Aquatic Resource Survey emphasizes where are our healthy waters, and let's do something to protect them. Let's make sure that we do have riparian buffers, trees along the stream and things like that. So we're working with the states to provide funding and technical assistance to protect those high-quality waters, to designate them as outstanding resource waters and things like that, that really help protect them so we can all enjoy them. So when I was reading about the Metcalf Institute, I read that the goal of this workshop is to help prepare journalists and scientists to communicate environmental news with greater clarity and accuracy, and that effective communication of environmental science is all of our responsibilities. It's the responsibility of the researchers and the journalists. And I couldn't agree more. We all share these roles of helping the public understand what their environment is about, what they can do to protect it, to understand the role of science, appreciate the limitations of science as well, and just to create greater awareness. So again, I really think it's wonderful that this class exists, this program exists, and that you're here, the people in the class, the fellows are here to take it, and also that the general public is here to take advantage of the speakers. So I encourage you to keep exploring and asking questions. These are some of the resources I think that went out to the class where you could look at things. And with that, I'm happy to entertain questions.